Hi, everybody. I'm Steven Goldstein. I'm director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Jewish Federation of Greater New Haven. And on behalf of our CEO, Gail Schlossberg, the president of our board, Dr. David Haas, and our entire team here, including Derek Holodeck, our marketing director, who is our tech person tonight, I want to welcome you to our latest installment of Hot Topics in the News. Tonight's program is it's on my mind lately, is Iran and the Jews, History and Hope. In producing tonight's event, I couldn't help but think of a chapter 1, verse 9 in Ecclesiastes in the Tanakh. And there's a quote there that says, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." Now, lest you think that's a pessimistic quote, it's not. It's one of the most hopeful quotes in the Hebrew Bible. It tells us that no matter how rough history gets, it always cycles back to goodness. Never give up hope. And indeed, the history of Iran and the Jews has been cyclical. We all know the very rough periods. All of us who are Jews know the story of Purim and Haman and King Ahasuerus. And we also know the Iran of today that vows to wipe out the state of Israel. But the other side is King Cyrus. Cyrus the Great is a cherished figure in Jewish history for emancipating the Jews and letting us rebuild the temple and go back to Jerusalem. And just before the Iranian Revolution, Israel had the warmest relations with Iran. They were friends and business leaders in so many senses of the word. Tonight, we have two extraordinary leaders who will tell us this story of hope, of optimism, that we can build a better future for Iran and the Jews of Israel, and all of Israel. And we present tonight because we believe in these rough times, we have to provide people hope. So joining us tonight it's an amazing team. My colleague, Sami Rahamim, is Director of Communications and Community Affairs for the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. I've joked with Sami that we have 7 Jewish federations in the geographically small state of Connecticut, and Sami's JCRC is Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Wow. And that JCRC is a gold standard nationwide. Sami and his colleagues do amazing work. So thank you, Sami. As Sami will tell you, his grandparents left Iran for Israel in 1949, and Sami's dad of blessed memory came to the United States in 1974. Now, a dear friend of Sami's and just a titan in the finance field in America is a man I've really gotten to know in preparation for tonight, an extraordinary human being, Ali Alizadeh. Ali and his family moved to the United States in December 1978. I think Ali said he was just 15, just before the Shah's reign ended in February 1979. Today, Ali is co-founder and principal of the investment group Hemisphere, based in the Metro Twin Cities. And one thing that Iranians and Jews have in common, we love food. So, Ali, I'm really impressed with your finance background, but you own 10 restaurants. This is awesome. So thank you for Persian food, which I think is the greatest food imaginable. So thank you so much. And Sami and Ali wrote a magnificent piece on the beautiful history of Jews in Iran in the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Many of us read it, and we had to get them both here. So without further ado, I want to present first Sami Rahamim. Sami.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Stephen, for having Ali and I here to build upon the commentary that we wrote together. We're coming to this conversation, as Stephen noted, from different paths. Ali an Iranian-American born in Tehran, me, a Jewish Israeli Minnesotan born in Minneapolis. But together, we both have the Iranian civilization DNA in our systems. And the stories of the bond between our people goes back, as Stephen said, 2,500 years, an incredible span that included some beautiful highs, and as we noted in our piece, the closing words of the Tanakh, of the Hebrew Bible, with Cyrus's decree liberating the Jews of Babylon to go up to their temple in Jerusalem. It's a magnificent place of hope on which our Hebrew Bible concludes. The contrast from that to today, where the relationship has been one of war, and the understanding that that's driven by the regime in Iran and not its people, is something that I think most Americans, certainly most Jews and Israelis, understand very well. One of the goals of our conversation tonight is to open up that history a little bit more, look into our personal stories and how the civilizational can become personal, and talk about the tension that exists both within Iranian civilization and Jewish civilization. And it's a tension that I think actually carries some similarities, some parallels that we'll dig into as well. But ultimately, the mission here is to learn, it's to understand, to know each other's stories on a deeper level, because really that's who we are. We are our stories. Our stories are how we make meaning in the world. And the regime in Iran has a very particular story that it's telling itself and its people about who they are and who we are, and we need to understand that. And there's another side of the civilizational struggle within Iran that tells a different story about who Iranians are. And so we want to look into that story as well. And through learning about this other country and its people who we appear to be locked in some kind of conflict with, I think there's also something for us as Jews to learn about ourselves. So there's a lot of different threads that we can pull here tonight, and hopefully folks can make use of the chat or Q&A features in order to help us understand, what are some of your questions for us. But before we go any further, I'm honored to turn it over to Ali to share a bit about himself and how he's thinking about this present moment.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Sami, for really making this platform and this time available to meet, so I can share a little bit about who I am and who, in effect, a segment of Iranian diaspora or Iranian people are, and shed some light over sort of the words that you as a community I know and unfortunately don't hear often enough. So again, I'm 62 years old now. I've lived here for over 46 years. When I left Iran, there was no such thing as, in effect, hatred of any community, let alone be the Jewish community. And over the next 50 years almost, there has been sort of this narrative that has been formed that somehow we have some sort of an animosity with a group of people based on their religion or misunderstanding of the word Zionism. You know, one of the things I think Sami knows, and Steve, we didn't talk about that while we were chatting before. I also teach entrepreneurship and at McAllister, and the whole thesis of at least what I have advocated for is the very notion of why. Like why is it this way? The whole notion, really the whole element of inquisitiveness and initiative, and then, you know, execution is sort of, you know, near and dear to every entrepreneur. But that whole notion of why is absolutely been missed by millions of Iranians. But why do we have this thing against, you know, Israel or Jews or and that lack of understanding, that lack of perspective, that their inability to have ever really met or interacted or entered in any sort of professional, personal, or social relationship has unfortunately led them to this dark path of misunderstanding, hatred, and what I realized a while back, not only as a way I wanted to live my life, but as when I did experience relationships with my Jewish friends, colleagues, friends. I mean, just to give you a flavor, um, I just was in New York City a month and a half ago at a wedding of a very good friend of mine who's an attorney in Canada, at his son's wedding, and I remember when I was at his son's bar mitzvah, and that was 16 years, you know, before then. So what I'm here and advocating here with you, as well as my Iranian American friends and or my social network and any other network that I'm a part of, is to really be as forceful of a voice to really share my own personal experience. That look, we're better together. We're stronger together. We have a history together. This is a dark, long nightmare in our collective history, and this will pass. And I genuinely believe brighter days are ahead. So, with that being said, I'm at your service, Steve, and anyone else for that matter that wants to talk about anything particular.
Could we hear more about your family, when it came, how it came to the United States?
Or happy to do that. You know, again, the story of diaspora, and I'm sure many of people that are on this call, you know, every one of our stories are unique, but especially with the Iranian diaspora, they're all really the same. You know, a good chunk of us came when we were 15, 16, 18. I came here. I lived in Tehran. My father was a military officer in the under the Shah's army. My mother was an educator. She was a teacher and a principal. I went to you know, a college preparatory school in Iran and moved here when I was, you know, my parents, my mother in particular, decided it's time for me to leave. And on Christmas of 1978, I arrived in the United States with my father. I lived it with, you know, my uncle who was here, who had come here because he loved Elvis Presley and went to Nashville and looked like Elvis apparently. And Persians are rednecks in parentheses. So I lived with him. My dad went back in a week or two, and then the regime fell. And next thing I know, next time I saw my parents were 1986, 87. So grew up in Chicago, went to McAllister, which is a small private school in Minnesota. Our claim to fame is, Walter Mondale went there, and Kofi Annan graduated from there. So, the very liberal school. Went and got, master's degree in finance in Rochester, Citibank and investment banking, and, you know, married got married in 1993. So we celebrated our 32nd wedding anniversary 3 days ago. Have three boys, and um, in a nutshell is, and again, there's, you know, struggle, and, it just makes you stronger. And it's, again, very typical, stories of, Iranian Americans here. No, nothing different.
Same.
So my family comes from Shiraz, Iran. We believe that we were there for generations, could be going back all the way to the time of the Purim story. And my grandfather was a Zionist who sprang at the opportunity to move to a Jewish state. Unlike the Arab world, in Iran, it was not time to go yet at 1948 or 1949 when my family left. It was unusual for them to be leaving at that point. And arriving on a moshav in southern Israel was a challenging difference from the urban life that they were used to in Shiraz. My grandfather was a jeweler in Iran and became a farmer in Israel. The rest of my grandmother's 9 of her 11 siblings came to the United States. Like Ali said, diaspora coming for education, for economic opportunity. And one by one, my great uncles came to America, and my father eventually joined them here when he came as a young man in 74 after the Yom Kippur War, on what you could call a post-war, post-trauma trip to visit the family that ended up becoming a lifetime in Minnesota.
Thank you. Ali, I have a question for you. We Jews never lost hope over thousands of years that someday we would return to Israel, and that miracle, to us, it's a miracle, happened in 1948, but we never lost hope. What has kept you from not losing hope that Iran will return to a pre-revolutionary, pre-radical Iran?
I could really answer this in a multitude of ways, but I think the best way I can answer that for you is to paint a picture that would seem unfathomable for you, and by you I mean sort of let's just say I live in the United States. So just kind of imagine if United States somehow went through a revolution today. Let's say, something happened, and what ended up in effect securing power would be the Archdiocese of Boston or something. And within a matter of a year or two, they would change, all the street names. They would make women wear clothing like a nun. I know this is funny, and it's just comical almost. And then think of what would precipitate over the next 20 or 30 years, and how policy would change. And all of a sudden, the dollar is no more pictures of Benjamin Franklin or George Washington. It's a picture of number of popes. So if you have lived, now imagine sort of go through a plethora of age distribution, whether you're 10 years old or 20 or 30, and then imagine 40 or 50 years, and then imagine you leave, or a bunch of people, and then economically you are absolutely decimated. It is almost unfathomable not to have hope, because by almost any definition, you have taken, it's not a giant step, it's you've dropped in a different millennia. So accepting that is delusional for 90% of Iranians. So what most people want in Iran, just like what most people want in any part of the world, is sort of what I've tried to explain to my colleagues here, is the average Iranian, no different than average Iraqi or Serbian or Argentinian, doesn't wake up in a morning and say, look, I want to go, I do for my religion now, or let's wage war or jihad, or let me kill a Jew. They get up in the morning wanting to take their kids to school, wanting to go to work, saying hi to their parents. They want to live a normal life. And that's what they don't have, regardless of the political aspirations that they may have individually. They're just not in it to hurt anyone, or they're not ideologues. The average person in Iran, regardless of their social or economic standing, they just want to live a better life. And that's what they don't have. That's why, we have, just to give you a flavor for some, I'll just throw some statistics. It's 30% unemployment rate. The average age of Iranians under 30 is 60 to 65%. 60% of people that go to college are women in Iran. The currency has depreciated by a factor of almost 100. Just kind of imagine that. One United States dollar, when I left, was 7 to 1. It is 100,000 to 1. So $100 when I left would buy a car, or 100 Persian 2 months would buy. Just to give you a flavor, the value of that currency, it has depreciated unfathomably, just unbelievably. So Iranians they're just not prospering or flourishing. They are subsiding at best.
So Ali, here's the million-dollar question. Given what you're describing, how come there hasn't been a counter-revolution?
You know what? It's a great question, and the short answer to your question is there is no good answer, right? Because at the end of the day,
bear with us, everybody. Ali, I think you're frozen for a minute. Derek, should we have Ali sign back in?
Yes, I think that's the best bet.
Sami, can you call Ali? You're seeing live television, everybody. So,
I'll send him a message.
okay. Thank you so much. And by the way, we have about 125 people tonight, which is extraordinary, everybody, for a summer evening, beautiful weather Zoom. So thank you very much. Sami, what did you grow up hearing about the Iranian Revolution?
About the revolution. I think similar to what we're hearing from Ali, that it's took kind of one country that people could recognize as being aligned with the West, with the United States, that was much more modern than much of the rest of the Middle East, and then completely changed its face and its um, and the reality for the people who live there. But as I've been learning about this subject, especially within the last 20 months since this war began on October 7, and one of my great teachers in this area is the Israeli writer Micha Goodman, and he does more than write. He also has a podcast in Hebrew that I have gained so much from. And there they talk about the ideas that are behind the politics, what are the stories that drive our reality. And in Iran, he has identified that you have this rich pre-Islamic heritage, which I would love for Ali to come back and share a little bit about. That, here he is.
Sorry, I don't know what happened. My apologies.
Oh, good. Ali, I was just sharing something that I have spent some time learning lately on, how you have these kind of dual identities within Iran that's very different from other, um, for example, the other countries, the other nations that were conquered by Islam at the founding of Islam. You look from Iraq stretching all the way to Morocco, the people were made Muslim, and the language that's spoken there is Arabic. In Iran, the
Yeah.
people were made to convert to Islam, but somehow the people also held on to this pre-Islamic identity, speaking Farsi, celebrating still some of the holidays like Nowruz, not an Islamic holiday. And perhaps most symbolic of this, um, the work that we've spoken about by Ferdowsi, the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings, that it stands right next to the Quran in terms of how influential a book can be in a society. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be part of this civilization that has both this pre-Islamic history and is also a Muslim country at the same time.
So it's a great question, Sami. It actually, I'll just go even one step farther than what you just mentioned about sort of Islam and Iran. Just by matter of history, I went to a Zoroastrian middle school. So Zoroastrianism, which some of you I'm sure might have heard of, is a religion that is the first monolithic religion that came from Iran, more than 2,500 years ago, and it's very it's sort of its pillars are really based on by and large paganism. So many of the celebration moments in Iranian culture are based on pagan tradition. So Nowruz, for example, Persian New Year, is the moment. It's spring equinox. It's the actual moment that the Earth circles the sun once. So it varies. Every year it's a different time. Sometimes it's 2 in the morning. Sometimes 4 in the afternoon. But we all celebrated everyone around the world exactly at the same time. Or we celebrate the winter solstice. These are big holidays in Iran. What I would also tell you is what happened to Islam in Iran, unlike many other places, Iranians took Islam and basically made it their own. So if you if you ever have heard of Sufis or Sufism, which is in effect the Kabbalah element, Kabbalah uh, um, version of Islam, the sort of
Mystical tradition.
mystical tradition of Islam. All that effort really came from Iran. So if you've heard of Rumi, who's that's that. So Iran really made Islam, it intellectualized it, and it by and large normalized it. And by normalizing, I mean it brought it into its modern version of what the current governments looked and felt like. So this effort that you see today, that is almost Taliban-like to some extent, that it is trying to forcibly make women do A, B, and C and remove legally rights from people. That's another reason that why this really doesn't have any, doesn't have traction with 80-90% of Iranian people. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Sami, but
May I?
Islam before the revolution was easily intertwined and weaved in our culture, as was in millennia.
Ali, I have a tough question that one of our participants asked, and I hope I can ask it respectfully. Somebody asked, and everybody, by the way, our chat is open now, so you feel free to post questions there. There are people yelling death to America and death to Israel.
Right.
Not all of them, I assume, are part of the Iranian government. They're rank and file people. So the Iranian people have been subject to brainwashing now since 1979. What do we do with that in our hopes for a different Iran?
Yeah, what my personal perspective is that we should not tolerate that. We should not tolerate slogans to become policy. At the end of the day, if I'm an American and someone in the other end of the world is yelling death to America, I should take that very seriously. If they put a clock in the middle of one of their biggest streets and put pictures of, and this is, by the way, this was in Iran. Here is a picture of Jerusalem and bunch of people that are marching towards Jerusalem with different flags. Somebody's holding an Iraqi and Lebanese and Syrian and flag, an Iranian flag, and you should take them seriously. And I'm glad finally we are. This, it shouldn't be acceptable.
Ali and Sami, our distinguished Federation members, Linda and JCC Yerbaum, are asking really a couple of compelling questions. First, are either of you in touch with Jews who are in Iran today and for whom we all are very nervous about? There's still a few thousand Jews, not many, but a few thousand.
I am not in touch with them directly, but I do speak with my Jewish Iranian friends that do speak with Jewish people in Iran and family members in Iran. And, they're highly monitored. I mean, life for them wasn't great. It's, there is a Jewish parliamentarian that is in, in the Majlis or their parliament, but their ability to live comfortably is not there. So,
But they're there. Why did they stay?
Again, this really is another part of the question that you asked. It's a different manifestation of the same question. Stephen, remember, Iranians are incredibly nationalistic. They, just parenthetically, that's why, the narrative that the regime and many other sort of apologists for the regime that have painted that, hey, we're very worried about the disintegration of Iran because there are different ethnic minorities, and historically there's not been an evidence of that. So parentheses closed. The response I would give you is that at the end of the day, I would suspect they're just as torn between their Jewish identity and their Persian identity. And I also know that from my understanding of somewhat religious Jewish friends, I think they feel somewhat a responsibility to keep the lights on in a place that is theirs.
And to some extent, Ali, you shared with me this video about the life of Jews in Iran that said that they're not exactly allowed to leave. It's a little bit
And
of like the situation with Soviet Jewry, where in this case, an entire family is not allowed to travel abroad at the same time. One of the family members, usually the father, is obligated to stay in the country. And so Iran kind of the regime uses this Jewish population as kind of a propaganda tool to say, we have Jews. They have their own synagogues, our struggle is not with Judaism, the religion, it's with, Zionist imperialism. That's part of their propaganda messaging. As Ali said, they even give a Jewish representative a token seat in the parliament. And so, but expressing Zionism or a connection with Israel is punishable by death, and so it's a very painful situation. But I imagine, like Ali said, also on some level, there are Jews in Iran who feel that that's their home, and they prefer to stay there. So that's a complicated picture.
Is there freedom of religion, at least for the Jews? I've seen that there are as many as 10,000 left. Are synagogues monitored, or does the regime at least leave that alone?
They're very closely monitored, and so again, it's kind of this Potemkin Judaism where they are permitted to have and provided perhaps kosher food, right? They're allowed to practice Judaism, just not Jewish peoplehood, just not a connection to their relatives in Israel. And so any sort of free political expression is not there. They simply provide a cloak of kind of a free religious expression, but as Jews, we can rightly see that, our religious identity and our political identity are inextricably linked.
Ali, did you grow up? You're Muslim. Did you grow up religious or not?
No, I wasn't. Interesting enough, so the short answer to that is no. I did not grow up in a religious family in any way, shape, or form, but I ended up studying Sufism for 20 years here. So,
Ali, let me ask, for people who are not so familiar with the different religious offshoots that we're talking about. You know, I've read the Quran. Um, it's not an overwhelmingly inherently anti-Jewish document. So what did Iran do to Islam to make it different?
Are you asking me what did this administration?
Yeah, so around the Islamic Revolution had to take control, I assume, of mosques and I mean, there's no separation of not church and state, but mosque and state, as we would say. So the government, I assume, controls mosques there and controls religious life now. Yes?
Yes.
They didn't rewrite the Quran, but is there a supplemental book like in Mormonism? They keep the Christian Bible, but there's a separate Book of Mormon. So is there some sort of separate supplemental book to the Quran that Iranian Muslims have to read and know?
So that what I know that let me tell you what I do know, and
Yeah.
So add a coefficient of significant less than 1 to what I'm about to say. So you would have in Sunni version of Islam, that is more pervasive, and there is hadith, or sort of what did the prophet say, or when he said it, or how he said it, and to whom he said it. There are elements of that, but there is really not that I'm aware of, that a separate book or separate
What makes Iran unique in the Muslim world is it being a Shiite country compared to the majority, Sunni Islamic world. And as Ali said, what's so fascinating is that it was in Iran over the last 1,000 years that the leading, both kind of the Kabbalah and the Halakha, the legal and mystical traditions of Islam were really pioneered by Iranian Muslims. And what this regime has done in the last century, that is really the piece I think that you're getting at, Stephen, is the way that it has reinvented what it means to be a Shiite Muslim. For much of history, Shiite Islam, what the identity of a Shiite was to be the persecuted minority within Islam. And it kind of had this, what you could call a quietist or a passive approach to the world. Someone, I think, maybe asked a question that hints at sort of a messianic vision. And the messianic vision in Shiite Islam was a more of passive piousness. But what the revolution did, both intellectually and spiritually, was to change the stories within Shiite Islam to become more in the tradition of violent resistance, taking the Imam Hussein, one of the main characters in the story of the founding of Islam, and turning him from a Jesus-like kind of martyr character to a more Che Guevara resistance character, where the message is about fighting the oppressor, understanding Iranian identity to be one of being conquered and occupied by the imperial West, and that through this revolution, they would bring redemption to Islam, to the world, and that I think is the great innovation of the clerics in this regime. Do I have that right, Ali?
Not only you have that, you know what? I'll encapsulate and simplify. I think you should view Iran and its aspiration as literally like Al Qaeda North, where Al Qaeda basically wanted to connect, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, sort of the Sunni version of, the Islamic State, and connect that in that sort of to the Levant and parts of even Syria. Iran wants to really, not Iran, the Islamic Republic, its political and geopolitical aspirations, and they've made that absolutely clear, is to create the same thing just north of Saudi Arabia. And they were going to connect Iran, Iraq, to Syria, to Lebanon. That just, I mean, it's the same ideology. They're just smarter and more organized at executing it. So when you're asking the question, should we be, are 80 million people are shouting death to America? But no, as a policy, they are doing, and they have been doing things at times faster and times slower, but they're moving towards that geopolitical goal.
So, Ali, I want to ask you a pointed question. Given the terror and the horror you're describing in Iran today, what do you say to American activists who claim to be pro-peace, pro-liberation, anti-oppression, who opposed Israel's Operation Rising Lion and the Trump administration's subsequent attacks on 3 nuclear facilities?
So I'm going to, for the time being, I'm not going to wear my Iranian hat on, but I will put their hat on, right? The sort of, I don't want war, and I don't want people also abusing women and suffocating Iranian people, and we shouldn't get ourselves involved in these sorts of things. I will tell you that you're first and foremost, I think, on the West, in the West, we tend to sometimes fall into that our economic supremacy brings moral supremacy for us, and it's insidious, and we don't catch it all the time. But we think everybody wants the same. They have the same goals. You're dealing with a regime that they just demonstrated they just want to kill Jews. They're not really making a distinction in their, they're when missiles fell in Beersheba, they didn't come and say, look, we're sorry for, that we killed a Holocaust survivor. They didn't say that. They don't care. They think that if you're living in Israel, you're a target, you're a Zionist, which means you advocate for the Jewish state, and therefore you are a infidel, and your life is fair game. So you're not dealing with a regime that has anything other than the goal of destruction of the state of Israel. If you again, everybody's different, and I respect everyone's points of view, but that's where they're coming from. So and obviously the argument is, no, they don't want to have a nuclear weapon. They want the threat of having a nuclear weapon But then the question is, to what extent you believe you're willing to live with that threat. And
I want to ask you a pointed question again.
I love pointed questions.
To whatever extent the US and Israel have substantially damaged Iran's nuclear capability, even if Israel and the United States knocked it all out, is that enough in your view, or do you want regime change?
Well, from a personal point of view, obviously, I'm a huge advocate of a regime change. If I now wear my American hat on and put my Iranian identity to the side, again, so I'm trying to take my selfishness to some extent out of it. I just can't imagine a world where we just dropped a bunch of bunker busters on a country and we're viewed as just intertwined with Israel. So we're just as big of an enemy as the little Satan. I just can't imagine a world where a regime that is run by ideologues that would now have a change of heart and say, I tell you what, we spent about $1 trillion to develop, in effect, nuclear technology, but it's not really for military purposes, although we generate less than 1% of our electricity from nuclear energy. It's been an absolute dismal failure. So I just can't imagine that regime will be more. I mean, it's a wounded wolf right now, and they're Iranian and Middle Eastern, and honor and culture matters. They're not just going to sit there and say, you know what, gee, we tried and we lost. I don't think they're going to come back. They're going to try to do it, more discreetly, but stronger with more. And by the way, remember, for their own edification and for their own ability to stay in power within their internal apparatus. I mean, if you've told everyone it is a source of our pride and we need to have it and we will have it and you can't screw with it and it's our right and you can't do anything about it, and they're just not going to change their mind. Now, I hope they do, but the evidence doesn't point to that direction. And their United Nations representative yesterday said exactly the same thing, and they're saying the same thing more vociferously internally, that we won the war, they didn't do anything, and we will absolutely enrich uranium and we'll be at it again. And the United States lost and Israel was humiliated. That's the narrative they're providing their people. So,
Ali, as I hear you speak, there's such commonality in a theme of what you're saying with what American Jews feel, and it's this. There was a famous Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan that said American Jews live in two civilizations, and we're constantly balancing it. We're Americans, but we're deeply proud of our Jewish heritage. And I sense you love to be an American. This country's given you amazing opportunities, but you feel for your native land deeply. I mean, and you carry these two things in your heart profoundly. Is that correct? And is that something you want to instill in your kids, or are your kids American?
So I'm gonna kind of, so the short answer is yes, and I'll just tell you. So my youngest son, who just graduated from GW, he's an intern at the Majority Whip's office right now in Washington, D.C.
Mazel tov.
So, and he's, real estate kid. He's going to do well. I asked him for his, I think 18th, or he's 21 now. I think for his 18th birthday, I said, what do you want for your birthday? And he said, Dad, his window basically looked over sort of a part of our house. And he goes, I just want to, when I wake up, I want to see the American flag. So can you put a pole in our backyard that has the American flag? So I went and got the biggest American flag I could find, the pole, and I just love that. So, you know, part of my culture, which by the way is part of I know part of the Jewish culture, is that the whole notion of, I was telling that to Sami and a good friend of mine, the notion of never forget, is just not, this is how I've come to understand that in my experience with my Jewish friends and colleagues, the notion of never forget is not just never forget the Holocaust or never forget all the bad things that happened to us, is never forget who did something for you. So when September 11th happened, the first call I got was from a good Jewish friend of mine. Hey, Ali, are you okay? Interesting enough, the empathy that I experienced during all these sort of turmoils in being a Iranian American in 46 years, the people that are most empathetic to what we're experiencing are our Jewish friends because they've experienced that. So when you're asking me, that notion of really remembering when people do something for you is one of the most axiomatic pillars of our culture. When someone loyalty, friendship, and the United States obviously, has opened its doors and had me as a guest, and I will never forget that, and I will do everything I can to pay that debt to some extent, not only myself, and we're trying to do that in multiple ways, but also instill that in my children. And so I know this sounds more emotional, but it's true. I mean, this is part of my culture. It's part of who I am. It's how I was raised, and that's why it's very difficult for me when people start, I mean, if this is my home, and I don't want to. I respect that. So,
Final question for both of you. We're going to wrap up now. What's the message of hope that you want to give to our members of the Jewish Federation who are here tonight in never losing hope for a Middle East and a Gulf that is not a threat to Jews, that is not a threat to Iranians? How do we maintain hope?
Yeah. Sami, you want to go first or you want me to go?
Well, I mean, I draw immediately to Hatikva, our national anthem in Israel is the hope, and that's our mandate, is to see the possibilities. And I think, if we look at the Iranian and Jewish civilizations as really the last two people standing from the days of the Bible, all the other people that were written about, the Hittites, the Philistines, the Canaanites, they're all gone, but the Persians and the Jews remain. And that, underneath this brutal Islamic Republic, we know that there's a civilization there that sees itself as more than what the last 46 years have allowed to be expressed. And the last 2-3 weeks of this military engagement directly with Iran, I think it gives us profound hope to show that this is a regime that is incredibly weak, that they were this paper tiger, that when the moment of truth came, they were hardly able, they did some, horrific damage in Israel, but it was nothing compared to what people expected. And the supremacy that Israel's military was able to show, I mean, people know this, but the supreme leader is what, 86 years old? You know, he's not a man who's going to change, but he will die eventually. And if nothing else happens, that alone will be a moment where I think Iranians will get to choose some kind of a new future. There's endless, I think, possibilities right now. It's a very scary moment inside of Iran right now after the end of the military campaign, where the regime can then turn its ire on its internal opponents or people it believes to be its opponents and people it wants to make an example out of to scare dissidents from rising up. But I think we've seen now that that the days of fearing this regime from the Israeli perspective and hopefully from the American perspective as well, viewing them as somehow untouchable through their proxy network and all the way into the heart of Tehran. You know, we are just at the very beginning of starting to see what hope can be on the horizon.
Thank you. Ali?
You know, I will say this from a practical perspective. 80+% of Iranian people simply don't want this regime. So eventually they will need to pay a price so their sons and daughters live a better life. They're welcome in the world community. They look across the ocean, or not the ocean, well, the Strait of Hormuz, and they see UAE investing in OpenAI, and they don't have electricity. This is not lost on the average Iranian people. They also see that at the end of the day, the political decisions that they're making is not getting them closer to that. It is farther isolating them and is hurting them economically, socially, in any which possible way you can fathom. So eventually, whether it'll be, and this is what I'm going to get to that in a second, eventually that change will begin to gain more traction, and this regime will fall. I will say, for the last thing I will say is this. I don't think Germans are upset because it took Russians and Americans come and free them from Nazi Germany. I don't think history books are written in a way that, hey, you know what? Hitler is really an asshole, but I'm conflicted now that my soldiers or they're getting killed because of A, B, and C. Throughout history, others have helped secure freedom, overthrow tyranny. And I think this is what I think shared with Sami at least, 50 years from now, when our Iranian history books are written, it's going to say that, the nation of Israel and its brave soldiers and leaders came to our help, and they didn't forget Purim. They came to our help, and we gained our freedom because of them. And for that, I think Iranian people will be forever indebted to
Ali, you just gave the most uplifting words to our Jewish community that we've heard in a long time. I'm really grateful to you on behalf of our federation. Sami, you're a great leader. Your JCRC does incredible work. And Ali, you are an incredible human being. You're a great man. I gotta go with you to one of your restaurants the next time in Minneapolis. You're second on my tour. There's Mary Tyler Moore's house is the first thing. And then dinner with you is the second thing. Sami will come. I'm so grateful to both of you. Ali, you're incredible. Sami, you're incredible. We're very grateful to you both. And thank you on behalf of everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
We're very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.